Latin from Scratch course, 9th class, we are going to learn a new tense, the active, indicative, imperfect past tense, which is quite long, so we are just going to say from now on imperfect. Okay, this is the keyword, imperfect. We are going to see why it is imperfect. It's not that there's something wrong with it, it's just the name, okay? This is one of the two main past tenses which is appearing all the time in texts about history, narrations, etc. We can imagine that in history, most of the times we are speaking about the past, so we are going to be using past tenses. So from the two main past tenses, this imperfect is one of them, so you can assume that this is very important. And of course, the first thing that we have to learn is the morphology, the general morphology of the imperfect. Then we have to, of course, as always, every time that we learn a new tense, we have to learn by heart the imperfect of the verb sum, which is very irregular, so we have to be learning it every time. And then, this is very important, we are going to see how to translate this tense, because English doesn't really have an equivalent of this imperfect. So we need to know how to translate it every time that is going to be appearing in our text, which is going to be quite often, okay? So first, morphology of the Latin imperfect in the indicative mood in the active voice is formed in the following way. Of course, I'm talking about indicative mood because much later in the course we are going to talk about the subjunctive, then the active voice, because we are going to be talking also about the passive voice, etc. No, but for now, indicative, active, etc. Okay, so how do we make up this tense? First, present stem. And now you have to be very careful with this, okay? Because this is at first something which is a bit confusing, all of this terminology, okay? Because we are talking about the past tense, but now I'm saying present stem. How is this possible? Because remember that we were talking about three stems, no? The present stem, the perfect stem, and the supine stem. And that's it. Latin only has these three kinds of stems. And now, depending on all of the possible tenses, for some tenses, we take the present stem, for some other tenses, we take the perfect stem, and for some other tenses, we take the supine stem. But because we use the present stem, that doesn't mean that we are talking about the present. No, we are talking about the past. So pretty much like these are two completely different things. Present stem doesn't mean necessarily present tense. Okay, they are two different things. And we just have to learn that imperfect uses the present stem. That's it. Okay, that's it. Then, present stem linking long e, in the third, mixed, and fourth conjugations. Then, the imperfect indicative morpheme ba. This is actually the most important part. This is what is telling us, okay, we are in the imperfect indicative. Okay, this ba with long a, and then the active endings, which we already know, because we said that these active endings are going to be working all the time in all of the active tenses. So, of course, this is more clear if we check the table, no? So here we have first, second, third, mixed, and fourth conjugation. And if you remember, when we were studying the active endings, we said that in the first person singular, sometimes it is o, like for example, in the present tense, and sometimes is m, for example, in the imperfect. But then the rest of the endings are the endings that you already know. So s, t, mus, tis, nt, okay? So that's it. Now, I'm going to be reading the whole table, as you can imagine, to make emphasis on the accents, on the stressed syllables, okay? So, because I mean, here pretty much you see that all the time, all of the forms have 3 syllables or more. So we have to compute the stressed syllable, okay? So here, remember that in the first declension, the a is long, always, okay? The a of the stem. So, like this, okay? So here, in this form, this syllable is the penultimate syllable. So it is the one that we have to take into account to check if the syllable is stressed. Okay, so we said if the penultimate syllable is long, then it is stressed. So it would be amabam. Here the same. Here the same. Amabas, amabat. Now, here we see that this syllable is not the penultimate. So it doesn't matter if it's long or short. We don't care. What we care is about the penultimate, which here is this one, and also here is this one. And now this is long or short? Is long. So again, the accent goes here. So amabamos, amabatis. And if you know Spanish, you might see a difference, because in Spanish this would be amábamos. Okay, so there's a difference. But for example, in Italian, it is amavamo. Okay, so yeah, if you know Spanish, don't take that into account. Okay, amabamos, amabatis, and then here again, amabant. Okay, then remember that also the e of the stem in the second conjugation is long. So it would be monebam, monebas, monebat. Now here we don't care. And here again it is long because it is long. So monebamus, monebatis, and monebant. Now, third conjugation. We see that these underlined vowels is this linking long e. And this linking long e is all the time here, and all the time here, and all the time here. Okay, so here again, we just saw that it is long. So again, duquebam, duquebas, duquebat. Here we don't care because this is actually the important one. And of course it is long. So duquebamus, duquebatis, and duquebat. Now here, pretty much the same all the time, no? So capiebam, capiebas, capiebat, capiebamus, capiebatis, capiebant. And now here, audiebam, audiebas, audiebat, audiebamus, audiebatis, audiebat. Okay? You see that once you kind of get how all of these things work, it's like automatic. You almost don't have to think about it. Now, imperfect of the verb sum, remember, to be. There is, there are, etc. We already know that the verb sum is highly irregular through its whole conjugation. That's why we always have to learn it by heart in every tense and mood. In the imperfect tense, we can even see that the root itself is irregular. So, because for example, in the present, we saw, no, tu es, then the third person singular est, in the plural we have estis. So we could assume that the root is es, no, somehow. But here it's not esam, esas, etc. No, it's er, okay? So that's the first irregularity. And then once we take into account that irregularity, is actually quite regular, okay? So it's pretty much the same as all of the previous verbs, okay? Just with this a, which is long, of course. And then m, s, t, mus, tis, enti. Okay, so eram, eras, erat, eramus. Again, Spanish is éramos, but that's Spanish. In Latin, eramus, here eratis, era. Okay, so that's the morphology. That's how the verb looks, how to conjugate the verb, how to recognize the forms, etc. Now, translation of the imperfect tense into English. There is no exact correspondence in past tenses between Latin and English. We will understand better once we have studied the perfect tense, which will be not in the next module. I think it's the 5th module. I'm not super sure, no, but not yet, just not yet, okay? For now, we have to take into account that English does not have its own imperfect tense. So there is no real imperfect tense in English. So how can we express in English what the Latin imperfect expresses? Now this is the quid, okay? The imperfect tense expresses an action which isn't considered finished. That's literally what imperfect means. Because remember, imperfect is the opposite of perfect. Now perfect literally means complete. So imperfect means incomplete. Okay, it's quite obvious. Okay, so the imperfect tense expresses an action which isn't considered finished, usually because it was in progress, it was repeated several times in the past, etc. Okay, so for example, a verb such as videbam can sometimes be translated simply as I saw. This is the most generic translation, let's say. But other times better as I was seeing. If you know some English grammar, you know that this I was seeing is called actually a progressive tense. Okay, it is a progressive tense, no? Because I was seeing is that I am in the process of seeing something. Okay, or I used to see. As for repetitions, because sometimes the imperfect means something which was repeated again and again and again in the past. No, so how when it means this, how do we say that in English? English uses phrases such as I would see. So you see that with one form in Latin, we express all of these things in English. So how to know when to choose this or this or this or this or any other possible way that you can think of. There is no way to say beforehand how to translate the Latin imperfect. Only context and, super important, what feels right. Okay, what feels right, what your gut tells you, that is super important. I mean, I know that it's not super linguistic, but it's super useful. Okay, so context and what feels right is going to tell you how to translate a form such as videbam. I saw, I was seeing, I used to see, or I would see. And that's it. That's pretty much everything we have to know about the imperfect tense. Now let's go and study a future tense.